To put the pockets in on the lower front, you determine what pocket are you making. So view A, so if you're making pocket for view A, you're going to do steps 28 through 38. If you're doing view B, you're going to do steps 29 through 49. And if you're doing view C or D, you're going to start with step 50 and go through 52. So we're doing step 50 through 52 because we're doing pocket for view C. So we want to start by finishing the slanted edge of our pocket. So we're going to turn our pocket edge and do what we call a shirt tail hem to finish that. So we're going to turn it under 1/4 of an inch and stitch the edges in place. For pockets view C or D, you're going to do steps 50 through 52. So we're doing view C, so we're going to start with step 50, and the first thing we're going to do is finish the slanted edge of our pocket. So we are going to do a shirt tail hem to finish that edge. To finish the slanted edge of the pocket, we're going to fold the edge in 1/4 of an inch, and then we're going to fold that over again 1/4 of an inch. We're going to pin that. And we're going to do that the length of the slanted edge. Fold 1/4 of an inch, turn it and fold it again 1/4 of an inch so that the raw edges are enclosed in the fold. To sew the slanted edge of the pocket, we want to stitch as close to the folded edge as we can. We're going to use a regular stitch length. We're going to back stitch. We're going to stitch along the folded edge, making sure that we get the raw edges enclosed in our seam. When we get to the end, we'll back stitch. We'll repeat the same process for pinning and stitching the slanted edge to finish the other slanted edge of the pocket. Once we have finished the slanted edge of our pockets, we will fold in the seam allowance of the remaining edges of our pockets, and then we will place the pocket on the lower front, matching our dots or circles for our pocket and our jacket, and then we will edge stitch around the sides and the bottom and the top of the pocket to stitch it onto the jacket front. To prepare the pocket to be sewn onto the jacket, we need to turn the seam allowances to the inside of the garment around the sides, the bottom, and the top of the pocket. So we're going to fold in 5/8 of an inch for our seam allowances around our pocket. We're going to do the sides, We're going to do the same thing on the top, folding our 5/8 of an inch. Then we're also going to fold the bottom 5/8 of an inch. Since we have a square pocket, we're going to fold our corners at the bottom and the side with our miter so that we get a nice clean corner for doing our pockets. And we'll pin that. And we'll do that to both corners. Once you get your seams turned up and pinned for the top, the sides, and the bottoms, then you will press your seam allowances. We need to pin our pocket onto the right side of our lower jacket front. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to align the edges or the corners of our pocket with our dots that we have marked on the back of our lower front jacket. So I have marked with pins on the front where the center of my dots are, just so it's easier for me to align so that I don't have to go look on the wrong side to find that. So then I'm going to line up my pocket with the top corners meeting with the dots at the top and the bottom corners with the dots at the bottom, and I'm going to pin that in place. So I'm going to pin across the bottom, I'm going to pin across the sides, and I'm also going to pin at the top. Once that's pinned, then I can remove my pins that were marking my dots. To sew our pocket, we're going to start at the side, we're going to sew down, pivot at the corner, sew across the bottom, pivot, and sew back up to the side. And then we will also sew across the top, leaving our slanted edges open to allow for our hands to be able to go into our pocket. To sew our pocket, we're going to edge stitch around the edge of the pocket to stitch it onto the jacket front. We're going to start on the side. We're going to start at the end next to our slanted edge. We're going to back stitch. When we get to the edge, we're going to go forward. And we want to keep it as close to the folded edge as we can. When we get to the corner, we're going to leave our needle down, lift up our pressure foot, we're going to pivot. We're going to sew across the bottom. We get to the end, we're going to leave our needle down. We're going to pivot. Put our needle back down. And we're going to sew up the side. When we get to the top, we'll back stitch. So across the top, we will start by back stitching. Again, we're going to edge stitch as close to the folded edge as we can. We'll sew across the top. When we get to the other edge, we'll backstitch. With the pocket applied to the lower jacket front, we will stitch the upper jacket front to the lower jacket front. After we stitch that, we will need to apply a seam finish to our seam allowances. We're going to sew the jacket front bottom to the jacket front top. So to do that, we have the jacket front bottom lying right side up on the table. We're going to lay the jacket front top right side down, and we're going to match the notches, the edges of our fabric, and we're going to align the edges of the seam. When we stitch this, we want to stitch right next to our zipper stop as we come across the zipper so that we don't have a gap or a hole in our jacket where the top is sewn to the bottom. To sew the top and bottom of the jacket front together, we're going to sew at 5/8 of an inch regular stitch length. We're going to back stitch, and then we're going to sew across the jacket front. When you get to the center front, you want to make sure that the facings are laying flat and that we're going to stitch right next to the bottom zipper stop so that we don't have a hole in our jacket. And you may have to pull it a little bit from the back to get it to move across the zipper stop. When I get to the other side, we'll back stitch. After sewing across the jacket, attaching the top to the bottom, you need to apply a seam finish to the seam allowance. To stitch the side seams, we will lay the jacket front and jacket back together with right sides together. We will stitch the side seams, and then after stitching the side seams, you'll need to apply a seam finish to the seam allowances for each of the side seams. To sew the sides of the jacket, we're going to lay the jacket back face up on the table, right side up. And we're going to lay the jacket front right side down on top of the back. We're going to match the armhole and the hem, or the bottom of the jacket, and we're going to align the seam allowances, or the edges of the side seam. We also want to make sure that our notches match as well. For the seam on the front of the jacket, we want to make sure that the seam allowances, both of the seam allowances, are facing down into the jacket front bottom, or the lower jacket front, and pin those. We'll do the same thing to the other seam allowance to pin it. To sew the side seam of the jacket, we're going to sew a 5/8 inch seam allowance. We're going to back stitch, and we're going to sew down the seam. Where we sewed the seam, where we joined the top and bottom, we make sure that seam allowance is laying flat and pointing towards the bottom of the jacket. We're going to back stitch when we get to the end. Now that you've sewn your seam allowance, you need to put a seam finish on your seam allowances and do the same thing to sew the other side seam.